Palestinian population has grown from 1.4 million to 14 million. That's a tenfold increase. There is no genocide in history that has ever produced that kind of population growth. TikTok is being funded by Iranian and Hamas money. Iran's anti-Semitism right now was planted there by Nazi Germany.
Offered the Palestinians 98% of the West Bank, all of East Jerusalem, and all of Gaza, and they walked away. And President Clinton said, all they want to do is kill Jews. Welcome to Tipping Point. I'm Jimmy Evans. Someone asked me recently what I thought the number one sign of Jesus' return is today. And I told them without hesitation that it is the explosion of worldwide anti-Semitism and hatred toward the Jewish people. It's always been present, but since October 7th, 2023, it has exploded and continues to spread like wildfire, being promoted by people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, radical Muslim groups, university professors and politicians, celebrities, and many others. Because of Bible prophecy, we know that at the very end of this age, the entire world will gather at the Battle of Armageddon to destroy the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And right now, we are seeing the growing reality of that event gaining steam. But the saddest part is the increase of anti-Semitism in the church. Believers all over the world are turning against Israel and even believe the church has replaced Israel and they don't matter anymore. For that reason, my colleague, Dr. John Anderson, and I have written a new book called Haman's Lies. This talks about specifically believers and unbelievers knowing the truth about the ancient roots of anti-Semitism and how to counter every lie told about Israel and the Jewish people with historical and biblical truth. John is joining me today on the show to talk about the book. He is the senior director and publisher of Tipping Point Ministries and is a prolific author and researcher. He received his PhD in religious studies from Baylor University and has an incredible gift of teaching and writing. John, it's great to have you with me on the show today.
Thank you. I get to be with you every week, but not on this side of the camera.
Well, I'm glad that everybody's getting to meet you.
I'm glad to meet them too. I do want to say to our Tipping Point community, I kind of feel like Miss Nancy on the Romper Room. You know, she wants to call out the names of all the kids, and I do want to just greet everybody. I communicate with a lot of people every day, and we really love you. We're glad to be a part of your life and your family, and we're glad that you're part of ours.
That's right. So John is just an indispensable part of everything that we do here at Tipping Point, and we've written a lot of books together. This is one that he's finally put his name on. I turned him in, talked him into putting his name on this book, but it was your idea, it was your passion for us to write this book. Tell about the journey that you went on in writing the book and kind of what you experienced.
Well, like you, Pastor Jimmy, as a child, I had this supernatural experience of falling in love with Israel. My parents loved Israel. They used to get films from the Israel Department of Tourism and show them in their Bible study group. And I can remember watching those as a kid, watching 1948 when that happened, people dancing as they entered Israel. And they even showed videos of the Holocaust, things like that. And so I had a what I would call a supernatural love for Israel, just like you did. When October the 7th happened, 2023, everything changed. Yeah. There was already a low-grade fever of anti-Semitism in the world, but on October the 7th, it's almost like that went into overdrive.
Right.
People began hitting social media. Before Israel even responded militarily, there were awful things being said about Israel, and people were marching in the streets. That bothered me. It didn't bother me quite as much until about October of this last year, and I began talking with Christians,
right,
young people, and I was sitting across the table from a young couple, and they asked me the question, what do you think about Israel? And I told them I defended Israel, but they had some very negative views of Israel, and they'd pick these things up. And these are Christian young people. They're in the church. One of them is actually a leader in the church. And it hasn't stopped since then. I've encountered young person after young person. Even this last week, I had a young person say to me that, why is the U.S. spending so much money on Israel? And I had to correct that notion and say, we spend $3.3 $3 to $3.8 billion a year, but all of that money has to come back to the U.S. by law.
Yeah.
It comes back to our own companies, our own defense companies, and we get $20 billion worth of investment back.
If it weren't on for Israel and the Middle East, we would spend another $20 billion in security for the Middle East.
Right now, that money that we spent, that $3.3 to $3.8 billion, is saving our Navy men on the aircraft carriers. Right. Because we have the ability to stop missiles. And all of that was tested in real time in Israel. We don't have that anywhere else in the world. Right. And they're able to do that for us. So to say that we're wasting money, yeah, we do send billions of dollars in other countries. But in Israel, every penny of that comes back.
Well, it's an example of the reason we wrote this book. And the reason we wrote it is because we want to give people real, factual, historical answers, biblical answers. We have 25 of the current lies. We're going to talk about Haman's lies and just the basis of all of the historic anti-Semitism. We're going to tell you exactly where it came from. We're going to tell you about Haman and who he is and the four lies he told to King Ahasuerus to get him to destroy all the Jewish people in Persia at that time. And then we're going to go into 5 of the 25 lies that people are saying today. We're going to give you the facts. And the great thing about this book, and John, you did a brilliant job of researching this book. This is full of research, full of history, full of all types of explanations, biblically and historically. So when you're confronted with a person that says anything about Israel, you get the facts. And at the back of the book, we have a kind of a quick summary of the lies so that you can just look at those and have a response that's correct, gracious, but also historically and biblically accurate. And so many believers today it's in our family, you know.
And I want to say that to our Tipping Point family. You said gracious. I think that is the word, because many of these young people, young adults that are saying these things, they're getting their information from TikTok.
Oh, sure.
You know, the TikTok is being funded by Iranian and Hamas money, the people that are posting on there. And I would just say to those families, your young people are saying this out of compassion.
Yeah, exactly.
They do care about people. What they have right now is misplaced compassion.
That's right. And you know, when you hear that Israel's committing genocide, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and things like that, you think, oh my gosh, those poor Palestinian people.
Right.
Well, it's just a lie. We'll tell you the answer to that in just a little bit. It's absolutely shocking when you hear the truth. But people are saying things like that. What surprised you the most as you were doing the research?
Well, what surprised me the most is the information's out there.
Right.
It's available. It's readily available. And there are people who are putting out bits and pieces of it on social media that are trying their hardest. On Substack itself, and I encourage our audience to go to Substack and look up those Jewish authors that are writing about these things.
Right.
They're writing about it in bits and pieces. So it really surprised me that the information is there. It's just most of the people aren't getting their information in a place that's reliable. Right. A lot of the people that are on TikTok and other social media places are talking about this issue, and they're very passionate about it. But when you confront them with the facts, these are people that couldn't find Israel on a map.
Right.
But they think that they're experts because they've heard some diatribe somewhere that makes them believe that they're right.
Yeah, and it gets them all emotional. So the title is Haman's Lies. And let's talk about Haman. Now, Haman was an official, a very high official in the court of King Ahasuerus in the times of Esther. And so Haman, he's introduced here, John, as Haman the Agagite. What does that mean?
Agagite, he's actually called that 5 times, and you would think, well, that's just a minor note in the text, but it's there 5 times because the writer of Esther wants you to know it.
Right.
And an Agagite is a descendant of the Amalekites. It goes from Esau, and then Esau's son, then finally Amalek, and the Amalekites are the biggest villains in the Bible.
They're the generational enemy,
right,
of Israel, and so Haman's bloodline goes back to Esau, and Esau, of course, hated Jacob because Jacob stole his birthright. He said, I'm going to murder him. And that's when his mother came to him and said, go to my brother Laban's house.
Right.
And Jacob had to flee for his life. Well, that seething hatred that Esau had for Jacob. That's the beginning point. Those are the headwaters of anti-Semitism.
Right.
That's the beginning point. And then he had Eliphaz, his son, who had Amalek, and that's where the Amalekites came from. Okay, we're going to go back to Haman here in just a second. But the Amalekites were the first people, the descendants of Haman, or Haman was the descendants of the Amalekites. They were the first people that attacked Israel.
That's right.
When they left Egypt. Deuteronomy 25, and this is the Lord speaking to Israel. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers at your rear when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore, you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. And then in Exodus 17:16, it said, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now listen to how Amalek fought, if this doesn't sound familiar. And by the way, they come from the same geographic region as Hamas.
Gaza.
Yeah, and so here, the children of Israel have not done anything to them, okay, except they're the descendants of Jacob. Okay, this is where the hatred came from. So they're coming out of Egypt. They don't attack the soldiers in the strength of the group, the stragglers. It's the old people, the infirm people, and the young people that they're attacking. Doesn't that sound like Hamas? Doesn't that sound like October 7th? And so these are the generational enemies of Israel. And that same spirit right now is what we see in Hamas, in Hezbollah, in Iran, all of it. It's exactly the same spirit.
The Amalekites were the original terrorists.
That's exactly right. They were terrorists. So now this is something that you draw out in the book that's so fascinating. Talk about this being a rematch. Talk about who Mordecai is, because Mordecai is Esther's uncle. And so in the book, you talk about who Mordecai is, because remember that when we talk about Haman, he is a descendant of King Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites. God told Saul in 1 Samuel 15, he told him, you go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Listen to what God said. Destroy every man, woman, child, and infant, and every animal. Don't leave anything alive. Of course, King Saul didn't do that. He destroyed everybody, but he left King Agag alive and some of the choice livestock. And that's why God rejected Saul from being king.
Well, I will say this about Saul, too. One of the reasons that Samuel knew it is because, and this is a famous verse, what do I hear? The bleating of the sheep. He hears the sheep in the background, and he knows that Saul has not followed through on what he's supposed to do. And then that is where we get the verse that compares rebellion to witchcraft.
That's right.
Rebellion to witchcraft. So Mordecai comes on the scene in the book of Esther. Esther, a lot of people don't know this about Esther. The Old Testament is not in chronological order. Huh. The very last book chronologically in the Old Testament is Esther. So this is the point right before Jesus in terms of on the timeline. And Mordecai is an important official, but he's not as high up as this fellow Haman the Agagite. Mordecai actually saved the king from a plot to kill him. And so but he also insulted Mordecai in Mordecai's mind. So Mordecai had it out for him. Now he is introduced as Mordecai, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. That's an important detail because remember, Saul was a Benjaminite and Agag was an Amalekite. Right. And Saul did not follow through on God's command to deal with the Amalekites. So now you have what we call a rematch.
Mordecai is a descendant of King Saul.
That's right.
They're both have Kish in their lineage, and they also are both Benjamites. And so this is something that's so this is literally a rematch. This is King Saul versus King Agag, or King Saul versus King Agag. And so very, very interesting. And the Lord is so amazing how he, orchestrates things like that. But this time, the good guys won.
The good guys won. Well, it also shows us just how tight the Bible is.
Yeah.
The people often read the Bible and they read it in bits and pieces. I call that fortune cookie reading of the Bible. This story follows throughout the entire Old Testament.
That's right.
This rivalry between these two groups. Now, I will go back to this idea of Gaza. The current Palestinians in Gaza are not from this line of the Amalekites. They're entirely different. But the spirit is in Gaza. And that's one of the things that we were talking about before we started, is that demons are immortal, but they're not eternal. Only God's eternal. Only God goes back eternally. They're created beings. But the reason why we see this spirit of Haman coming up in every generation is because demons don't die.
Right.
And Jesus talked about that. If they leave one place, they go searching for another house.
Yeah.
And so they've stayed in the same geographical region and they've found another house.
That's exactly right. And the same spirit from generation to generation. So let's talk about Haman's lies. Again, the book is called Haman's Lies. It talks about exposing the ancient roots of anti-Semitism. We're talking about going all the way back to Jacob and Esau, and that's where it began. The hatred began, and then went on from Esau's lineage. But this is Esther 3, and Haman is going to the king. Now, he's offended at Mordecai. Mordecai will not bow to him, as everyone bows down to Haman and gives him honor except Mordecai. Now, I believe the reason for that, John, is because they knew each other.
Right.
And Haman knew that he was a Jew, and Mordecai knew that he was an Amalekite.
Right.
Okay. So they have this generational hatred there. And so Haman finally goes to the king and he says, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed from among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. They do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Okay. Now this is, the original Holocaust.
That's right.
Okay? He's planning on,
That's right.
And Purim is called Purim because they literally cast lots to see when they were to do it. Okay. And so go through the 4 accusations. These are the 4 generational lies that never die. When you see any lie being told about Israel, they come from here. These are the 4 lies that Haman told.
Well, and I use 4 Ds to help us remember. And if you go back into the text that you just read, you can see those 4 Ds. They're different. That's the first thing he says. Their laws are different. They're not like us. They are a people. In other words, they're different from us. And the thing is, we're all different.
Well, if you go to Canada, they're different. If you go to Mexico, they're different. If you go to France, they're different. Why would you accuse the Jews? Because they have differences.
The difference is often used as a reason to necessitate animosity.
That's right.
If you're different from me, I have to fight you.
Yeah.
Of course, God doesn't ever say that.
That's right.
And that's the first charge that's made against them. They're different. The second charge that's made against them is they're disloyal. And what it's saying is
they don't obey the king.
They don't obey the king's laws. So it's right there in the text. They're disloyal. Esther is the queen. Remember, she's the queen. She's fully submitted to the king.
Absolutely.
She's submitted to the point of death even. She could die.
Queen Vashti, the queen before her, got rejected because she wasn't obedient, and Esther had the favor of the king. She was totally obedient.
She literally saved the king's life because she's the one that went to Mordecai and told him about the plot against the king. And it's a total lie to say that they're disloyal. Right. The other D is they're dangerous, and the text deals with that as well. It's a fabricated lie to cover up the real issue, and that's that Mordecai wouldn't bow to Haman.
That's right. It's just hatred and jealousy.
And so Haman, his own arrogance could stand that. He was evil, and he needed a justification for what he was going to do or what he was plotting to do. And then the 4th D is they're disposable, and it actually just says that in the text. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed.
Yeah.
They're disposable. Let's get rid of them. That's always the end game of anti-Semitism. In Nazi Germany, the idea was to get rid of Jews entirely, not just from Europe, but the entire world. That's why they engaged people like the Mufti in the Middle East, which is a Palestinian leader, because they wanted that to spread all over the world. Iran's anti-Semitism right now was planted there by Nazi Germany.
Wow.
So it was planted there by that. And so when you hear things like from the river to the sea, that sounds like a wonderful slogan in people's minds. So yes, we're We're talking about liberation. Now, what you're talking about is extermination of the Jewish people. Push them into the water, drown them, kill them, whatever it takes. So completely destroy them. They're disposable.
So they're different, they're disloyal, they're dangerous, and they're disposable. The thing that's really hard to believe is that you could ever justify exterminating an entire group of people. When you say from the river to the sea, you say that's from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Then what if you take the Jews out, where do they go? You kill them.
Right.
That's what Hamas wants to do. They
That's
want
right.
to kill them. So let's go into
And I will say one other thing: globalize the Intifada. What does that mean? That doesn't mean just from the river to the sea. That means cover the entire earth.
and they're harassing Jews all over the world. Many Jews are now moving back to Israel because of what they're experiencing in the United States and especially in Europe. So now Haman's 4 lies have morphed into a lot more lies.
That's right.
And so we're going to talk about, there's 25 lies in our book, and we talk every one of them, we answer in detail. Every single lie, we give you the information, the truth. This is the absolute truth that's undeniable. Something happened this Purim that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was eliminated on the very day Jews celebrate deliverance from a man who tried to destroy them. The spirit of Haman is real. It's not just in Iran. It's in the halls of Congress, on college campuses, and in the media. 25 lies about Israel have been repeated so often that even good people are starting to believe them. That's why we wrote the book, Haman's Lies. This book dismantles those lies with truth, and right now we have a chance to put it directly into the hands of every member of Congress, every senator, the president, every governor, and 1,000 pastors across this country. $15 sends one book. Our goal is $30,000. Go to endtimes.com/donate and help us get truth into the hands of the people who shape this nation. This is an Esther 4:14 moment. For such a time as this, God has put us here. Together, let's reach this nation. Okay, well, we're answering here. And we want to equip every believer out there, even some that are not believers, you're just interested. This is the truth about Israel. It undoes Haman's lies, the core there. But genocide really never begins with gas chambers or machetes. It begins with lies. That's right. It begins with words.
It begins with words.
Yeah. So that we're trying to deal with the hatred that is now stirred up toward that. But let's talk about the 5 lies, John. The actual 5 lies. These are just 5 of the 25 that we deal with in the book. But you hear these all the time, and so we're going to tell you the truth here. But the first lie is Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, that one is very common. That's one of the most common lies that you'll see on the internet. The truth is, a genocide destroys an entire population. Palestinian population has grown from 1.4 million in 1948 to 14 million. That's a tenfold increase. There is no genocide in history that has ever produced that kind of population growth.
And if they're committing genocide, they're doing a really terrible job of it.
They're doing a horrible job.
When from 1.4 million to 14 million today, but the Hamas Charter, right, Article 7 in the Hamas Charter calls for the genocide against the Jews, and there will be no compromise or negotiation.
That's right.
The only answer. So you've got these people that people are feeling sorry for them. Oh, those poor Palestinians. Well, I do feel sorry for some of the Palestinians because I know that they don't want to be there.
Right.
Hamas, I don't feel sorry for them. They're demon possessed. They're full of hatred, and they exist for the purpose of destroying the Jews. Genocide. And no one says that about them.
That's right.
It's in writing.
Well, and what Hamas does is they hide among civilians. All of their military weaponry is hidden underground under civilian facilities. They even come out in hospitals. They come out in schools with weapons, and they're ready to fight right there in a place that ought to be safe, but it's not safe because they've stored weapons and munitions there.
Israel does everything they can to warn the Palestinian people before they attack. They send out texts. They drop leaflets. They do everything possible.
They do what are called roof knocks. They drop objects on buildings so that people will know they're about to hit that building. It gives them a warning.
Hamas does the opposite.
Does the opposite.
They kill babies. I saw 45 minutes of raw footage of October 7th, and they said before they showed us the footage, this was in the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., they said, we're not going to show you what they did to the babies. Babies, children, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, raping girls, all the things that they did. Israel doesn't. I'm not saying Israel hasn't made any mistakes.
Right.
I'm just saying they are a army that is sophisticated, principled, and they fight soldiers. Hamas is the opposite. So line number one, Israel's committing genocide. Here's the answer. The population of the Palestinians has grown tenfold.
That's correct.
Since Israel started, from 1.4 million to 14 million. Genocide is the total extinction of a people.
That's correct.
It means you're trying to totally wipe them out. Okay. So the people being killed in Gaza is an example of this. And there are some innocent people being killed. First of all, the numbers that are supplied by Hamas.
That's right.
So when you hear on the news that so many people got killed, Hamas is supplying those numbers. Those are, by and large, the vast majority are terrorists who are being killed for what they've done on October 7th, but also what they're still trying to do. So number two lie, and this is a huge one, you hear it all the time, Israel is an apartheid state.
Yeah, well, is people think of Israelis being just Jews? About 20% of them are Arabs.
That's right.
They vote, they serve in parliament, the Knesset. There are Arabs on the Supreme Court. Which in the U.S., the Supreme Court really has more power than the president. Yeah. And so, in fact, that Supreme Court convicted a president in the past, and it was an Arab justice that made that pronouncement.
Yeah. Now, in Israel, every Jew has to serve in the military, man and woman, but not the Arabs. And you say, well, that's discrimination. No, they can serve in the military, but they're not forced to serve in the military, because here's what Israel believes. They don't want to force an Arab to go to war against an Arab neighbor and be killing relatives or family members. Okay?
That's right.
So it's compassion. They can serve in the military, but they're not forced to. 20% of the citizens of Israel are non-Jewish, gay, Christian, Muslim, whatever their faith is, whatever their ethnicity is. And so apartheid, like, for example, in South Africa, I think most people became familiar with the term apartheid because of South Africa. Blacks couldn't travel into white areas without a passport.
That's right.
They criminalized interracial marriage. It was a totally apartheid state, which meant only white people could have privilege.
Right.
Okay. It's not true in Israel.
No.
Non-Jews serve in government. They all vote. It's so the whole argument is just absolutely lame.
South Africans who have studied apartheid, academicians, people that were involved when it was apartheid, are saying Israel is not apartheid.
That's exactly right. Well, in Soviet Union, they were very much anti-Semitic, had pogroms against the Jews, they were murdered and persecuted in the old Soviet Union. But the reason that they justified it is they came up with the belief that Zionism is racism. Okay. In other words, if you're a Zionist, I'm a Zionist, I'm a Christian Zionist. Zionism is we believe that Israel has the right of self-determination in their homeland.
That's right.
Who doesn't have the right of self-determination in their homeland? Every country on earth. So, but the Soviets came up with this thought that if you believe in Zionism, in this homeland for the Jews, it means you're a racist.
Right.
Well, they have many different races.
Well, unfortunately, they exported that to the United Nations, and the United Nations actually made a proclamation saying that.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's how unbelievable it is. So let's go to line number 3 here. Israel stole Palestinian land. What about that, John?
Israel, there have been Jews in Israel for 3,000 years. They've never left. There's always been at least a remnant there. And the land that was bought, that was procured before 1948 was purchased, and much of it for a higher price than was market price.
Right.
So a lot of the land that Israel sits on right now, people paid good money for that. The other part is some of that land was taken in war, which any country in time of war, we're at war with Iran right now, and we're talking about taking the island of Karg. We could take it if we wanted to.
Sure. And in international law, when you take land that you were invaded from,
That's right.
you can take that land and it's your land.
It's your
So in 1947, the United Nations partitioned Palestine, the land of Israel today, and they gave the best property to the Arabs, and they gave the rest of it to the Jews. They did not have access to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was an international city at that point, no man's land. The Arabs had the best agricultural land. The Jews were given a lot of desert land, and the Jews said yes, and the Arabs said no. That was international law. The United Nations passed that law that created a two-state solution. Israel said yes, they said no. They then, May 15th of 1948, the day after Israel declared their independence, 5 Arab nations invaded Israel, and that began the war for independence. They won that war, and in 1949, there was an armistice map that was drawn, and even more, they had taken even more land during, Israel won that miraculously, this infant nation. They miraculously won it. They took up more land, and that was the armistice map that gave Israel more land was recognized again by international law. Then in 1967, in the Six-Day War, they took Gaza from Egypt.
That's right.
They took the Sinai from Syria, and they took the West Bank and East Jerusalem away from Jordan. Okay. So they took all this land. They redrew the map again in response to war.
That's right.
And that's what you're saying.
That's right.
So first of all, Israel began in 1947 the two-state solution from the United Nations. And from that point forward, the lines were drawn based on wars when Israel was attacked.
That's right.
Okay. And so terrorism, attacks, all different kinds of things like that.
We could right now, Jordan had an opportunity between 1948 and 1967, almost 20 years,
Right.
to turn the West Bank into a Palestinian nation if they had wanted to.
Yeah.
They didn't.
And no one ever said a word.
No one said a word. And that's happened repeatedly. They could have had land in the Sinai and turned that into a Palestinian state. They didn't. In fact, they've been offered several times to have their own land and own state. That's not what they want. They want Jerusalem. They want the entire land.
No. Well, what happened in Gaza is the perfect example of the history of Israel, especially the modern history. In 2005, under the George Bush administration, we, along with the United Nations, the United States, along with the United Nations, forced Israel out of Gaza. Gaza flourished with Israel being there. They used it to grow flowers and all gardens and plants and everything. It was just beautiful. They forced Israel out in a land for peace deal.
That's right.
And they gave it to the Palestinians. Then war between Fatah and Hamas broke out, and Hamas won. Then it became a war zone the rest of the time. No peace, land for peace. We're going to give you land, and you're going to give us peace. Well, they got the land, and they declared war immediately.
That's right.
And Hamas, from that point forward, has been attacking Israel, which has resulted in what's happening now. And then people go back and say, you stole the land. They didn't steal that land. Yep. Just like right now, they took it back because of the hostility.
That's right.
And so the line number 4 here is Israel illegally occupies the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
Well, we sort of dealt with that already. They took that in war. 1967, they took that in war. And now I will be fair and say that it's not a settled matter.
Right.
I mean,
it's a disputed territory.
It's a disputed territory. But Israel is occupying it because of time of war, and they've offered several times to withdraw in exchange for peace multiple times, and every time the Palestinians rejected that. They did it in 2000, 2001, 2008. That would have created a state on virtually all of that territory, and every time they've gone to the table and made that offer, in fact, Arafat was given that offer, and he walked away and made no response at all.
Well, President Bill Clinton, I believe it was in 2000 at Camp David, he said, we offered the Palestinians, the Jews, through Camp David, offered the Palestinians 98% of the West Bank, all of East Jerusalem, and all of Gaza, and they walked away. And President Clinton said, all they want to do is kill Jews. We gave them everything they wanted. And they said no, because all they wanted was just fields.
Well, Arafat admitted later on that he didn't even look at it. He didn't even look at the offer.
Well, they do. It is a disputed territory, but they took it during war.
That's right.
And they had been willing to negotiate it. You know, Israel has shown their good faith. Let me say this. Up until 2023, October 7th, Israel has made, since 1947.
That's right.
1949, 1967, they have made repeated offers to have a two-state solution. In 2023, October 7th, they said, never again. We're not going to believe in those lying demons ever again, because that's all they are.
Right.
They're a bunch of liars. And so they say they want peace. Give us this land. We'll give you peace. And what Israel's saying is never again. And this is where I believe Armageddon comes in. I believe ultimately Israel is going to be tried to force them. In fact, the United Nations would do this today if it wasn't for the United States.
That's right. They would.
Is that they're going to try to force Israel to give up East Jerusalem, West Bank, whatever they're trying, or the whole land, give it up. And when they say no, the whole world will gather against them. Well, that's the United Nations.
And I think people don't realize there were countries that did support Israel until a couple of years ago. England, France, you could count on them. And now the U.S. is standing alone.
Thank God for what the United States has done.
Right.
One more question here. Like, again, there's 25. We answered 25 of these in the book. And this is number 5. Israel is a settler colonial project. Now you hear things like this. Listen to the answer, because we're going to tell you the truth about the answer. All this stuff is nonsense. Well, what about that, John?
When empires were built, when England built their empire, people came from the mother country and they took over various islands and states and places, territories. There was no mother country that Jews were dwelling in at the time they went to Israel. There was no place. These were mostly refugees who were fleeing what had happened during World War II.
Right.
And so they came from all over Europe. They came from over 100 different countries.
So 850,000 Jews were expelled.
That's right.
From Arab countries in 1948 when Israel declared their independence.
Well, there's your apartheid and genocide right there.
I'm just saying, if they were colonized by Arabs.
That's right.
But these were Jews coming out of Arab countries. But the other thing, so England is an example of this, Sean. England was an empire Britain was an empire for many years. And India was an example. They were a colony of the British Empire. And you would go to India and they would speak the Queen's English. And they would observe high tea and all of that because they took their culture over there. Who else in the world speaks Hebrew?
Nobody. Few seminary professors. That's about it.
Yeah. The Jews are the only ones that speak Hebrew. They have a unique culture. As John said earlier, they have perpetually inhabited the land of Israel for 3,400 years. Okay. They are indigenous.
That's right.
They are indigenous to the land. You cannot colonialize a country that you're indigenous to.
Well, they were colonized. They weren't the colonizers.
I bet they were.
The Ottomans came in. Various groups came. Romans, the Brits. Everybody came in. There was no Jews coming in to take over the land. They were already there.
And in the book, we wrote this book John did a brilliant job of the research in this book. History, facts, graphs, everything in here. But to give you what you need to understand this issue backwards and forwards, that someone says something to you, and if you don't know it already, you can reference this book and go, someone at work says something to you, and you can grab this book and read it, and you can go to the back of the book and just see specifically maybe what they're saying, and it gives you an immediate answer that you can go back it up with, or you can read the entire chapter. But we talk about in the book, we're almost finished here, but we have some things we want you to hear. If you'll stick around, the spirit of Esther. We're talking about the roots of ancient Antisemitism, why the spirit of Esther must arise. What is the spirit of Esther?
The spirit of Esther, she responded to every one of Haman's lies with her life.
Right.
They're not dangerous. They're not disloyal. She was very loyal, just like we said earlier. And in every generation, Esther's have to rise up. And sometimes they have to rise up at danger to themselves.
That's right.
One of the stories I tell in the book, I'm of Danish descent. My last name's Anderson with an E. I have to correct people every day. And that's because I'm of Danish descent. And the one story I'm particularly proud of is how the Danish people rose up during World War II. Hitler asked King Christian, how many Jews do you have in the country? And he said, we don't have any. We're all Danes. And that's how they acted. And then when time came that the Nazis were going to come and take all the Jews, common people, doctors, fishermen, farmers, they rose up as a people, and in the middle of the night, over about a week period, they smuggled every one of the Jews out of the country except for those who were either elderly or ill, and they put them on fishing boats. Sometimes they hid them under the straw. And in fact, one story a lady told later on is she remembered as a child, someone said to her, well, what was that like? And she said, for some people, it smelled like fish. To me, it smelled like freedom.
There you go.
And they rescued every one of them. That's the spirit of Esther when it arises in an entire nation. I hope that America will be that kind of country. That's what I hope.
I hope the Christians will stop being so gullible. And as you said earlier, a lot of the anti-Semitism is couched as compassion.
It is.
But it's ignorant compassion. It's misplaced compassion. When you know the truth, and we don't want anybody to hate the Palestinians or anyone, but we want you to know the truth because people are hating the Jews. 46% of people worldwide, John, have a negative opinion about the Jews.
That's right.
And it's all based on lies.
That's right.
And so Mordecai came to Esther, and Esther was the queen. And in Esther chapter 4, Mordecai said to Queen Esther, don't think that living in this palace, you're going to get spared. They'll come find you too. And he said, help for the Jews is going to come from somebody. But who knows that God didn't put you here for such a time as this?
That's right. And Esther knew she might die when she approached the king. She was not supposed to do it according to the protocols. She was not supposed to do it in that way, but she did. Mordecai was not just speaking to a young Esther.
Right.
The book of Esther is in the scripture because it's there for us.
That's right.
It's there for the Jewish people. It's there for Christians. It's there for the world to show us what it is like in a time of pressure and in a time with deception. How do you respond?
Right. And we're living in a Haman moment. We're living in an Esther moment where people need to stand up. And a lot of people are fearful. How many people would put on an Israeli T-shirt with the Star of David on and walk around the mall?
Not very many.
I mean, you're putting a target on your chest. And so there is such anti-Semitism in the world right now. Now, Haman, the good news in the story is Haman died on the gallows that he built for Mordecai.
He did. Haman lost, Esther won.
And this is what's going to happen. The sheep and goat judgments in Matthew 25, Jesus there is judging people who survived the tribulation by how they treated the Jews during the tribulation. The interesting thing there, John, is when he condemns the goats to hell, it's not for anything they did.
Right.
He never said, you spoke evil of me, you persecuted me, you put my people to death. What he says there is, I was naked, you wouldn't clothe me. I was sick, you wouldn't visit me.
Very practical, simple things.
It was for the sin of omission.
Yep.
Okay. It was uncaring. What about the people? So how we treat the Jews is a big deal scripturally. But the other thing there is God blesses the sheep with eternal life. He says, come into the kingdom prepared, So they come into the kingdom. This is so important. And so John and I have written this book, and I encourage you to go to Amazon.com to get a copy of this book. It's in paperback. It's in hardback. I'm holding a hardback copy right now. Buy one for yourself. Buy one for a friend. Buy one for your pastor. Now, we're in the process right now of giving. We're sending Haman's Lies book to President Trump, to Vice President Vance, to every cabinet member, to every U.S. senator, every U.S. congressperson, every governor of the United States, and 1,000 pastors. And we're sending these out. And what we're asking you to do is, in addition to buying a copy for yourself, for $15, you can go to endtimes.com/donate. For $15, your $15 will help us, not helps this ministry to continue to grow and do everything that we're doing, but it also helps us to pay the bill for Haman's Lies being sent to leaders across the nation. 1,000 pastors are going to receive free copies of this book, okay, because of those of you who help us. So go to endtimes.com/donate and help us right now with your most generous gift. You're going to help this ministry to keep going forth, and like this program right here, helping people to understand the nation of Israel and the history of Israel and what the Bible has to say. and also just Bible prophecy. We got a testimony the other day, John, we get these all the time.
Right.
A man wrote in and said, I've always been so fearful of what's happening in the world. He said, for the first time, because of your ministry, I have tremendous peace. That's exactly what we want, is for you to have understanding and have peace and actually look forward to the return of Jesus. And so Haman's Lies, exposing the ancient roots of anti-Semitism, why the spirit of Esther must arise. John, thank you for being with us today, and you did just a brilliant job here on the book. And so Haman's Lies, go to endtimes.com/donate and help us send these books to leaders, thousands of leaders all over the United States. And by the way, when we finish with that group, we have other groups in mind we're going to send it to. So we're going on the offensive, and we're sending this out. And I realize, some senators or Congress people or governors aren't going to read the book. I don't think the squad's going to read the book, but it's going to get in their office.
Yes, they will.
And maybe one of their staff members, maybe one of their family members is going to end up reading it. And so please help us.
There's believers hidden everywhere.
That's right.
So we're hoping that those believers will get this book and it will at least give them the courage to be an Esther where they are.
And you have some family members or friends that may be, very bought into Tucker Carlson and, Candace Owens and all this stuff. Buy them a book,
We're going to send Tucker a book.
Yes, we sure are. I've got a list of names of people that I'm going to send to, and I hope you've been blessed by it. And I hope that you'll become an evangelist for Israel. I hope that you'll get the book, you'll give the book away, and that you will help become an Esther in this most critical moment. Thank you for joining us today. God bless you. Goodbye.